All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Katie Swenson, and I am the Thriving Earth Exchange Community Science Fellow for the Carmel Valley Wildfire Education and Mitigation Project. And today's webinar is on the topic of moving towards a fire-resilient landscape or vegetation management. And we are very excited to have our wonderful set of panelists. We have Chris Walton, Matt Dumlow, Paula Bertrand, and Jamie Tuatelli-Lewis. I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping items before we start our panelist presentations. So this webinar is being recorded. All attendee cameras and microphones are muted. Throughout the presentations, please feel free to type in your questions into the questions and chat box. We're going to be saving those questions and we will ask them of the panelists towards the end of the webinar. And then there'll also be an opportunity to ask additional questions, and we will put links to a post-webinar survey and to where you can enter those further questions that you have that may come up later after the webinar. So look for those in the chat and questions box. So this is the fourth of a 5-part wildfire webinar series. If you guys are interested in viewing the recordings from our past webinars, you can do so on the FireSafe Monterey County Council website. It's here, firesafemonterey.org. So we've had topics such as home hardening, creating effective defensible space, emergency planning, and evacuation preparedness. And then today's webinar on vegetation management. And then next week will be our final webinar. And that is on the topic of steps that you can take as residents of Carmel Valley or Monterey County or the surrounding areas to prepare your community for wildfire. And so registration for this last webinar is also available on that FireSafe Council website. So this webinar series is the first part of the 2-part wildfire education and mitigation project with AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange. Thriving Earth Exchange is an organization that aims to connect communities with scientists and provide support to tackle local priorities related to natural resources, hazards, and climate change. So the post-webinar survey and the Q&A sessions are helping us to scope part 2 of the project, and we'll be posting project updates on the CVA bulletin, as well as on the Monterey County FireSafe Council website and at thrivingearthexchange.org. And that is the end of my introduction slide. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Let me get this introduction going. Okay, so our first panelist is Chris Walton. So Chris, if you could turn on your microphone and your camera. So Chris has been a part-time resident in Carmel Valley since 1987. And she became a full-time resident after retiring from her position with the state of California as a consultant for the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. Since moving to the Central Coast, Chris has been serving her community through participation in many local organizations, including the White Oaks Homeowner Association Board of Directors, where she served as president for 16 years. The board of the League of Women Voters, and she currently serves on the board of chamber music for Monterey Bay. Chris is currently in her 7th year as president of the Carmel Valley Association, and the association is now 70 years old. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Chris.
Okay, well, thank you so very much, Katie, for inviting me to participate in this. We're really grateful to be able to participate because fire issues are extremely important, and particularly since this is a science and community-based webinar on wildfire safety. It's kind of a central issue now for us in the Carmel Valley. First, I'd like to just to give you a little background on the Carmel Valley Association. We started, I think we are now into our 71st year. It was originally a residents homeowners association, and then over the years it has taken on a broader meeting and mission. It is one of the oldest and largest. I think we have, depending on the year, ranging between 700 to 900 residents of the Carmel Valley are members of our organization. And we are one of the most successful community organizations in Monterey County, in that the issues we take on representing the Carmel Valley, we have generally success with. It is a 100% volunteer organization. Our board members volunteer, and in addition to our board, we have a number of committees that local residents join and help us carry out the business of the committees related to the Carmel Valley Association. Natural resources is one of them, and the whole issue of fire prevention has been being covered under that particular committee, but it's a topic that we deal with fairly regular. Right before I joined this meeting, we spent approximately the first hour of our regular monthly board meeting discussing the issue of eucalyptus and invasive species, non-native, and the impact that they have, especially during fires. So the topic is fresh in my mind right now. We work to preserve, protect, and defend the natural beauty and the rural character of Carmel Valley. That is our central mission. This is a beautiful valley. It's presently not overbuilt, although the traffic is continuing to get more difficult, and keeping it rural is quite difficult sometimes, particularly since we were touted in the travel section of the New York Times about 4 years ago under the headline of the hidden valley, the hidden jewel, the Carmel Valley, which sort of really, we think, increased our visibility. Therefore, we have many tourists coming in here, and we are like a mini Napa these days, with 21 wineries located just in the Carmel Valley village. The Carmel Valley is 11 miles long. We're sort of, the village is at the end of it, and so we get a lot of tourists, and I think that has a lot of implications. So it becomes really important to be concerned about the risks of wildfire. I think local citizens are pretty tuned into it, given the experiences we've had with fire over the last few years. And so one concern that we have is the number of individuals who are not from this area who don't realize what a high risk area it is. It's a very narrow valley. It is surrounded by hillsides with all kinds of vegetation, both native and invasive, highly flammable. There's one road in the valley and out of the valley at each end, and a couple of ones that could get us over the hills onto Highway 68, but in the event of a major fire, it's kind of a scary proposition to think about, and particularly because the feeders into the main areas would be Highway 1, which is highly congested, also a narrow and heavily trafficked road. So getting out during a fire would be quite difficult, and actually going in any direction, because of the nature of the hills and the vegetation everywhere, fire is a potential menace from almost every side. So that's on our mind continually. As an organization, we meet monthly as a board. Our committees meet in the interim. We also try to maintain regular contact with our county supervisor, Mary Adams, and as issues come up that we're concerned about, we discuss them with her on a monthly basis. We also meet with the Monterey County Planning Department, or with Housing and Community Development, and that's to stay on top of issues that are important. We also, try to stay in touch with Parks and Recreation, because they handle some of the areas, also like Garland Park. It's a regional park of quite large. I'm not sure of the actual acreage, but it's one very heavily visited, especially since COVID-19, and where potential fires are quite likely. We also have several other areas as well. We deal with the issue through our land use committee. The 2016 Soberanes fire was a threat to the valley. It caused, not in the valley here, but nearby, over $229 million in damage. The Carmel Valley Village airfield was used as a staging area for firefighters and helicopters. In 2020, we had 4 major destructive fires: Carmel River and the Dolan and Coleman fires. Homes were lost and damaged, and many were evacuated or under advisory. I was evacuated for 5 days. We know that 2021 is drier than 2020, and that there's a 40% reduction in the snowpack. So we really need to be prepared for the next fire, because it will invariably come. And as all of you know, we're starting early in the season this year, not necessarily here, but in other parts of the state. And so it's really important that we be informed, and that each individual who lives in the Carmel Valley take precautions and prepare for the next wildfire, and any mitigation measures that we can take. In the webinar 1, we heard about home hardening. In 2, April 14th, we heard about creating a defensible space around our home. And so today, this is going to be very, very critical, how we prevent fires, and the kind of awareness we have. It's not a matter of, if it will happen, it's when it will happen. And, we've got to be prepared for it. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, Chris. That was wonderful. So now I'm going to introduce our next panelist, and my internet's a little unstable, so I'm gonna turn off my camera here. Okay, so our next panelist is Matt Lumadou. Matt has been with CAL FIRE since 2006. He has worked in the San Benito Monterey unit as a firefighter on an engine for 7 seasons. And for the last 6 years, he has worked as a defensible space inspector. Matt just became the San Benito Monterey unit's fire prevention specialist. So we are super excited that we are able to grab him for this webinar. And he also does fire damage inspection. So he's very knowledgeable in this area. So go ahead and take it away, Matt.
All right, well, thank you very much for having me. It's really nice to meet all of you. And I just want to start by thanking you all for the work that you're doing. Prevention, planning, and preparedness is the way to start. And it looks like you are all off to a great start. I'm here to help. And at the end, if you have any questions, please hit me up with them. I'm not seeing my share screen. Is there a chance you can send that to me, please?
We are seeing your screen. If you could just click okay. From the beginning to start.
All right, no problem.
Perfect. Thank you.
All righty. So some of this discussion is review for many of you, but I want to emphasize the importance as well as talk about some of the changes to defensible space. One of the great resources for information that I really like to talk about with people is readyforwildfire.org, and I believe that we will have a link to that later. If not, it's pretty easy to remember, but lots of good pictures, information, everything you could use there. 2020, as we all know, was a historic year for wildfires. Just in our area, we had 4 major fires with over 100 structures destroyed. From history and research, new and better methods of how to prevent structure loss are always being studied. Flying embers are proving to be one of the most destructive aspects to structures. So with spot fires or ignition by lofted firebrands and embers, such as pieces of wood, that is one of the most significant mechanisms of fire spread that we're seeing. The higher the winds, the more chance of spot fires we have. So different weather patterns and weather conditions can always play. So radiant heat refers to the emission of energy in heats or waves. This is just one way that heat can spread to the home. Heat can be ignited from vegetation or structures nearby, can melt your siding, break windows, and even ignite fuels adjacent to homes. Enough heat to ignite the structure can be readily available if combustibles exist close to the home. Flame impingement. We must create separation between all the flammable and combustible items near the structures. What that means is not just vegetation also. We need to remember to remove anything that's flammable near these structures. Defensible space. I was a defensible space inspector for 6 years. I still do it. And I'm going to say defensible space works. We can easily reduce the likelihood of ignition through defensible space. Public resource code is basically what we use to enforce defensible space. It's the law that's written for it. In 2005, Public Resource Code 4291 extended the defensible space from 30 to 100 feet or the property line. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets more than that. And soon a new law will go into effect enforcing a zone 0 or a 0 to 5 foot buffer zone around the home. And that's something I want to talk a lot about today, or to an extent. So why do we do inspections? For safety, and it's the law. Easy as that. The goal is survivability of a structure and safety. It's also good for the firefighters to have a fighting chance. If there ever is a fire in the area, we want them to be able to do their work around these homes without additional hazards. So what I was talking about with the zone 0, the 0 to 5 feet zone, is kind of a newer thing. What we really want to focus on is the elimination of anything flammable within 5 feet of the home. We also want to try to eliminate anything where fire could take a path or be a wick straight to the home. So in this picture, you can kind of see some vegetation tucked up next to a wood or combustible fence. Those are some things that we want to try to eliminate. Again, in zone 0, this is the highest priority zone. We often recommend just starting at the side of the house and working your way out from there. The first 5 feet needs to be nothing flammable, and there are new laws that are going to really enforce this. One thing that CAL FIRE is recommending, and I know that this is a webinar about fire resilient landscaping, but they're going as far as recommending planting pavers and bricks for that first 5 feet, and especially under decks and around railings also. So here's just a little bit of information. I don't want to take up too much of your time talking about it, but all of these things, if done correctly, can greatly increase a home's chance of survivability during a wildfire. The next slide coming up is a close call I had. I live in Santa Cruz and I work in Monterey. So during the Monterey fires, the river fire and the Carmel fire, I was stuck in Monterey working, and here in Santa Cruz, we had a pretty big fire that began raining embers at my house. So this was a plastic dog bed that was forgotten on the back porch. You can see on the right side, it's small, but it is a burn mark that actually started to burn this bed. I was pretty good about making sure that I had flammable items away from my house, but this is just one thing that was kind of forgotten about. So this part is a little bit long. Basically what it's saying is good watering, pruning, and cleanup practices accompanied with the elimination of combustible materials in a zone can help with fire resilience. They're even talking about removing combustible mulches within 5 feet of the home. So at some point, basically almost everything can burn. So if you think it's something that could burn, that's going to be something we want to get away from the home, again, to reduce any chance of embers landing in that and spreading the fire to the home. This is a great picture about Zone 1. I know a lot of you know about defensible space. I like this picture because it's pretty obvious to me that this home had a good Zone 1. They may not have had a perfect Zone 2, which is the extension out to 100 feet, but the Zone 1 that they had was enough to, what it appears to be, stop this fire without the need for suppression. So this house got lucky, and they also may have saved it by doing the work. So the spacing of vegetation is what we're trying to accomplish. The little arrow with the crude circle that I drew, that's what we're trying to eliminate. You can see where fire has a chance to easily climb up into the tops of trees, and that's something that we want to stop. Zone 2 again is an extended zone out to 100 feet or your property line. They say which is ever closer. I say as far as you can go legally. You can't obviously do work on someone else's property, but in my experience, as much clearance as you can do is always helpful. So again, fuel continuity. The picture on the right bottom shows it a little bit better, but what we're trying to do is not just vertical fuels, but also horizontal fuels. So fire doesn't have a chance to spread side to side or straight up into the canopies. Once fire gets up into the canopies of trees, it's a whole nother ball game. It's harder to fight, it starts dropping hot embers all over the place. And yeah, ground fire is just a lot easier to deal with. So again, we talk about removing ladder fuels, things like that. Fire may creep or smolder through some of the leaf litter, but it's a lot less likely to get into the tops of trees. Removing saplings or underneath trees to reduce the competition for light and water and nutrients really benefit the trees and helps for a fire, more of a fire safe area. Larger, healthier trees are often less susceptible to drought also, and drought mortality, which causes them to become fire hazards. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but try to avoid planting any trees or bushes that have a woody, oily, or high resin content. One of the saddest things I saw when doing damage inspection in Santa Rosa was a beautiful stucco home that had probably an acre of clearance all the way around it. And they had some Italian cypress that they had beautifully planted that lined their entire driveway all the way up to the front door. Unfortunately, it was a wick. It went all the way up the driveway and ignited the underside of the patio on the front door, and the home burned to the ground. The good news is it can be achieved. You don't have to spend a lot of money, and you can create a fire resilient landscape while reducing the risk to your home. Driveways are a very important one to me and to our firefighters. The more attractive an area looks, the more they are going to be able to take action in that area. Good clearance on the sides of driveways is essential for the firefighters to get in. And one other thing that's very important is please make sure that your addresses are posted visibly and readable from the access road or street. These are our engines that we have. Both of these types of engines will respond to wildfires, especially if there's a wildfire in an urban area or a wildland urban interface, what we often refer to it as. These engines are getting bigger every year that we get a new one, or when we do actually get a new one, they're just larger. So make sure that you have good clearance. I often say if a UPS truck or a propane truck can get up to your property, we probably can also. So I will kind of close it up with asking you again, is your home ready? Please make sure to do so, because I never want to see anyone's home look like this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. All right, so now I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is Paula. Paula is an educator, a land manager, and a watershed artist. She is the creator and publisher of the award-winning book, Passion for Place, Community Reflections on the Carmel River Watershed. For over 30 years, Paula has been employing ecological practices that help regenerate native plant habitats where she lives. Additionally, Paula has been a freelance educator and volunteer for various environmental causes for the past 32 years, continually expanding her knowledge of watershed health and ecological awareness through advocacy for the Carmel River, native plant habitats, and fire preparedness. Paula has lived in mid-Carmel Valley since 1965. She offers her knowledge of ecological land practices through Rising Leaf Restoration Consulting. Now, let me just share the screen. And Paula, are you able to unmute yourself? We've been having some internet issues. Paula, it looks like you're muted. Well, I think what we might do is we'll come back to Paula. It looks like maybe there's some connectivity issues. So what I'm going to do is switch over to Jamie, our next speaker, and then we'll come back to Paula. Let me change over to Jamie. Okay. So I'll introduce Jamie now. So Jamie joined the Resource Conservation District for Monterey County in November of 2018. Jamie previously worked at the Sierra National Forest for the U.S. Forest Service for 13 years as the assistant forest botanist. Before that, he worked several seasonal positions for the Forest Service throughout Oregon, Washington, and California. Jamie attended the University of Hawaii at Manoa with a bachelor's in botany, and then went on to achieve his master's in forest ecology at Oregon State University in 2004. His career is focused on the management of rare plants, invasive plant management, and large multi-resource project planning. He's worked in several aspects of wildfire response and fuels management activities while in the Forest Service. So, Paula, we're gonna go ahead and have Jamie present since he has his pulled up right now, if that's okay. And then we'll go to you.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katie, so much. Can you see my full screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Katie, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for attending. I appreciate it. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about firescaping, or creating defensible space through landscaping around your yard. A lot of this stuff, I think Matt Lamadou already covered to some degree, so some of this will be a bit of a rehash, but I think it's important, so you'll get another reinforcement of it, and I think it's good information. So I'm going to start. So as Matt mentioned earlier, creating defensible space is a California regulation, Public Resource Code 4291. Where defensible space has to be out to 100 feet if your yard goes that far. There are going to be new codes and regulations coming online soon that will sort of increase the local fire agencies' enforcement ability on defensible space. So people need to be aware of that. It's potentially possible in the future that if a property is not in compliance with defensible space regs, that they could hire a contractor to do the work for the yard and then bill the owner, or possibly in a very severe case, put a lien on the property. I don't think that most fire agencies would want to do that, but that kind of mechanism might be possible pretty soon for recalcitrant landowners. So I also want to mention that starting this year, homes that were built before 2010, if you're going to sell them, now you have to give buyers a notice that language on how to harden that home and list of features that the seller is aware of that makes the home vulnerable to wildfire and flying embers. And one more thing I'd like to mention about regs that is coming up in 2025. When you do sell a house, you're also going to have to include a list of low-cost retrofits that you've done to the house and any that you haven't done to any potential buyers. Just know that's coming down the pike as well. Next. So I'm also going to talk about that those zones there. Whoops, sorry about that. So this is a great picture of what happens when you have vegetation close to a structure and it catches on fire. The vegetation isn't exactly touching the structure, but it's within a few feet. It must have caught an ember and caught on fire, and that's the end result over there. So I want to talk about that 0 to 5 feet zone that Matt was talking about a bit, but in the 5 to 30 feet zone, because I think that's all space that most of us, if we own a home or property, can work in. There is the zone beyond that to 100 feet. Some people don't have that. I don't have that. But so I want to focus on that closer zones. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on about what you can plant and some of the things you can do in there. So like Matt said, it's strongly recommended that you don't have any combustible materials within 5 feet of your house or structure. Now, I think that can be interpreted in a couple different ways, but like Matt said, if you can get away with not planting anything in that zone, that might be best. But you could possibly have some plants in there, but there's some criteria that they should probably meet. Other things like firewood or structures like sheds or trellises, they shouldn't be in that zone either. So if they're attached to the house, you should think about removing them. If you have wood mulch or rubber mulch is actually even more flammable than wood mulch. You should think about getting rid of it and replacing with rock mulch or compost. And things like wood decks, which I have. I'm gonna have to really brainstorm about what I can do to replace my wood deck, or actions I can take to mitigate that risk. And things like propane, maybe not store it right next to the house. That wood fencing Matt was talking about connecting to the house, it acts like a wick. I have wood fencing connected to my house, so this is all stuff that affects me personally. So I cribbed this slide from the University of Nevada at Reno, which has a great program, and also Tahoe Friendly Gardening group. So this is just sort of like a diagram of the zones around a property and what you can do in those zones and some design and planting ideas. I think it's great because it shows you that it doesn't necessarily have to be a moonscape for it to be fire resilient. So basically what they're saying in that first 0 to 5 feet is that if you do plant anything in there, it should be maybe like a very low ground cover with rock mulch, possibly a maintained lawn. If you do plant anything in there, it should be really short, like under 6 inches. Try to pick native plants whenever you can. As a former botanist, I heartily recommend doing that. Do not have any woody plants in this zone, period. And then there's some photos around here that give you a few ideas of what you can do. There's some rock, there's some like ground cover, like sedum, which is a stone crop. There's some, you can plant things like thyme and strawberry, which are both, they're all like low ground covers and they're not resinous. They have in here periwinkle or vinca major. I wouldn't plant that, that's a non-native. But again, these are just ideas to say it doesn't have to be barren, okay? You can plant things in that zone if, they're gonna be low ground cover type things. So next slide. So here's a little checklist of maybe things you could plant in there if you really wanted to have vegetation within that zone. Plants with high leaf moisture that aren't resinous. They don't carry a lot of dead material on them. Things that shed a lot of bark or twigs, you probably should not have in there at all. If you're going to have plants in there, they either should be irrigated or they should be drought tolerant, and they definitely should be low growing. And so the opposite is what you don't want in there. You don't want plants with a lot of leaves or needle litter. You don't want them with a lot of branches going everywhere or really small, fine leaves because those catch on fire easily. And of course, resinous leaves or stems. So another thing you can do with your landscaping is use hardscaping like pavers, gravel and cobbles, brick to break up the vegetation you have in your yard, either in that 0 to 5 feet zone or out to 30 feet. This is so fire can't, if it does catch your vegetation on fire, it can't transfer to the house, or it's contained within that area that the hardscaping is around it, right in there. So again, one of the greatest hazards is having plants against combustible siding or under or near windows, so they can ignite the surfaces behind the siding if it's allowed to enter through vents and gaps near the foundation. Remember that fire rises about 2 to 3 times the height of a flammable surface. So if you have something that's a foot tall, it can go up to 3 or 4 feet with the flame lengths. So just remember that if you do have plants in that zone, keep it low, very widely spaced. They should be at least 2 feet away from windows. And I would highly recommend using potted plants or container plants in this zone if you want to have vegetation in there. So when we extend out to 30 feet, then you have more options. You can start incorporating shrubs and other types of plants, even some small trees. But I think the important concept here is to have a mosaic. So the vegetation's broken up. So you have a shrub over here, but then there's a lot of spacing between it and the next shrub. In fact, you should have at least maybe 10 feet of spacing, if not more, between woody plants in this zone. And of course, you can go nuts with like planting forbs or flowers in this area, like cone flowers, things like that. Irises are really good. You know, there's a whole bunch of options in this area, but remember the mosaic concept, that's what you want in this zone out here. Of course, you can have a lawn out here too as well, and that's what a lot of people have. So break up the spacing, keep at least 10 feet of spacing between the canopies of trees and shrubs in this zone, and keep trees at least 10 feet away from the roof of your house. Don't have shrubs under trees in this zone at all, because that's that ladder fuels that Matt was talking about. You want shorter plants if possible. Keep the yard clean of debris and dead leaves in this zone. Keep on top of that. If you have a lawn, keep it well maintained. You know, don't have the grass growing up to like waist high in this zone. So I want to talk a little bit about beyond the 30 feet and what happens if you have a neighboring property. So the diagram here shows like, you know, person X's house here, and they do defensible space out to 100 feet, but then their property line on one side doesn't go all the way out. It only goes up to 70 feet, and then the remaining 30 feet is on the other property owner's house. You really should work with the other property owner, if possible, to get that defensible space for the both of you. That seems to be one of the main things I hear about a lot is, you know, my neighbor's not doing all that they can to maintain their defensible space, but I am. So this is an opportunity for you to open up communication between the both of you to talk about the defensible space. I think it's key because most of us live in neighborhoods and we don't all have 100 feet out from our house. So I would encourage people to do this. Try to work with your neighbor. If you don't get along with your neighbor, try something else. So I'm just going to show some examples of what I think are good fire-resistant landscaping examples. You know, some of this looks pretty swanky, but you know, it can be very simple. Maybe you just put rock or gravel around plants. Like I love this Cleveland sage up in the right-hand corner. It's just a beautiful plant, and then around it you just have gravel. That works, you know. That even if the sage caught on fire, it's not going to go anywhere. I also like the one on the lower left, even though I think it looks like there's some vegetation growing up close to the house. So maybe it's not the perfect example, but still the general concept applies. They have hardscaping, they have low growing plants and shrubs in the yard, and it's broken up. And this house on the right is probably like ideal for like a fire agency to see. There's just nothing but rock within 5 feet of the house. What vegetation there is probably like sparse and either well irrigated or, you know, not big enough to be a fire concern. So these are all just examples. So I also want to talk quickly about, it can look different depending on where you live. I'm using some examples from different states, but even in Carmel Valley, the microclimate changes from the west end of the valley where it's moist to the east end where it's drier and warmer. So on the left up here is a picture from Arizona, and you can see the house up here. You know, it's got some rock around the house up in the left center. And it's just got some like Arizona scrub and bushes out there. And it looks like firefighters were able to defend that home because of that firescaping around that home. And you can see where it burned up and they were able to defend there. On the right, you have a house up in Oregon and very different vegetation, but the trees are limbed up nice and high. There's no ladder fuels that I can really see, maybe just the possibility of ladder fuels in the future. There is some sparse vegetation on the ground. It doesn't have to be that moonscaped underneath, but the general concept applies. You don't have to get rid of your trees if you're living in a tree heavy landscape. You just make sure that you maintain your trees to make them, you know, resistant to fire and not get those crown fires. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. And that's the end of my presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Jamie. Those are great examples. And we're getting a lot of great questions in the Q&A box. So if you guys have questions that come up as the panelists go through their presentations, please feel free to type them in and we'll ask them at the end. Okay, so I think we're going to try having Paula present. Paula, are you able to unmute yourself? Oh, perfect. Let's see.
Yes.
Great. So I have the slides up, Paula, and if you want to just tell me when to advance, I can do that.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and take it away. Paula,
Okay, you can advance. Well, thank you very much. So yeah, thank you, Katie, Thriving Earth, and Jamie of the Resource Conservation District for this opportunity to share what I've gleaned over the years regarding moving toward a fire resilient landscape. I may not know everything, and there may be some slides in here that maybe aren't quite right. I guess I'll learn as I'm going here. But these are the things that I've learned. So work from your basic principles of whoops. If you could go to the next one, I guess, basic principles. So as we've already heard, to work from your home out, creating a fire resilient landscape is a collaborative community effort, as we've heard. Preserving biodiversity is in everyone's interest. So I've understood that it's best to thin and prune vegetation rather than wholesale clearing, and remove invasive plants, do vegetation management work at the right time of the year, and to think like a low intensity fire so that you have low plants, let's say in your oak woodland forest, rather than things that are really tall. Okay. The next slide. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Paula.
So this, okay, perfect. Yeah, I wasn't getting the slide coming up. So the next one here is the Fire Safe Council from Monterey County, their Community Wildfire Protection Plan, and they've got a list of invasive plants that they recommend that you don't have them. So eucalyptus trees, French broom or Genita, poison hemlock, thistle, pampas grass, and all the other ones that are listed here as well, along with other plants that aren't listed here, in my opinion, such as Pride of Madeira. And then there is a resolution passed by the Board of Supervisors in June of 2019 that focuses on the removal of invasive species. And in this particular case, I've highlighted the French broom as they had in their document, yellow star thistle, arundo, but it's not limited to that list. And they highly encourage everyone to take action to prevent their spread because they increase wildfire frequency and they displace native flora and fauna. Next. I'm not seeing it yet. I don't see the next slide.
I'm sorry. I think maybe there's a little bit of a delay. The slide that we see right now is the Genita has invaded at least 100,000 acres. Is that the correct slide?
Yeah. So what I might do is pull up my own slideshow. Yeah. So that particular slide shows, I believe, is that the Carmel Valley Road images?
Yes.
Oh dear. Let me see if I can just pull it up for myself. Yeah, so that shows Carmel Valley Road, you know, Genita on the hillsides, how it has spread exponentially on the hillsides in Carmel Valley from the mouth of the valley, you know, out to mid-valley and then beyond in certain locations. So it's a very aggressive plant, and that's why it's so important to for every homeowner and landowner to get a handle on this plant. Okay, next. So this particular one shows a hill here in Tierra Grande where, again, the Genista is spreading, and you know, the homeowner hasn't done anything about it over the years. And the photograph next to it shows the dried, dead Genista, the brown sections interspersed with the growing Genista. So it increases the fire hazard for homes in addition to the trees that are there. And it also represents a loss of biodiversity. Next.
Okay, next.
So I'm forwarding it on my own screen. Yeah, the next one is Genista spreads after clearing and fire. This one was up in Tasahara Road just the other day when I went up there. And this area was burned not that long ago. And Genista is taking over this whole area. So it just goes to show how quickly it can take over. Next.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've got the next one, telephone pole.
Yep. Yeah, I will go ahead and.
This one with the telephone pole is along Carmel Valley Road. Okay. This one with the telephone pole just shows again how tall Genista can grow. This is about 10 to 12 feet high. And then the image next to it is Genista growing up along a driveway, and that there's a home right at the top of that. So it's very thick Genista allowing to be grown there. So next.
Got it.
This particular image, or two images, before and after, shows an area of Genista that I worked on last year, showing how Genista is a ladder fuel into the crown of oaks. So right underneath the oaks on the other side, it's totally barren ground, but the Genista was allowed to grow straight up into the trees, which is, you know, detrimental to the oak trees and could carry a fire into those oak trees. And it's very important to remove Genista before it goes to seed, generally by late spring. Next image. Next slide.
Okay.
Do you see this one with the bare soil?
Yes, we do.
Okay, it's not changing on my end here. Okay, so these are two examples of bare soil clearing that have been done in my neighborhood. And what I've understood is that this kind of clearing where there's nothing to stop embers from just rolling straight up the hill, it's just not a good idea to have this amount of bare soil. In addition to the fact that it can increase erosion potential, and it also allows for invasives to come in. Next one.
Okay.
This one shows that mastication was done during nesting season, down to bare soil, just this past April. So again, it's bare soil all the way up to the top. And this is right off of Carmel Valley Road at Loma del Rey. And then this next slide shows the bare soil and lack of follow-up allow for flashy fuels, such as the invasive annual grasses, Italian thistle, Genista, poison hemlock, and also yellow mustard to proliferate. This second slide, the second image on the bottom here, that all that yellow is Genista that was mowed once and has continued to, they've allowed it to continue to grow. That's just a second year growth. Next slide is of eucalyptus. This is a hill in mid-Carmel Valley, where this shows just a fraction of these eucalyptus that have been planted maybe within the past, I don't know, 15 years. And on this whole hill, there's homes towards the north, and there's even more eucalyptus within that whole neighborhood. So to me, it seems like a pretty scary thing that so many have been planted in that neighborhood. Next one, again, also shows what Matt was showing with the Italian cypress. They're known by firefighters as Roman candles, and they burn very intensely with a very tall flame. I saw a video on Fire Safe Marin that shows you how tall these flames and how intense they get. So this whole bank of trees, that would be pretty scary to go by that, or if you could get by it. So these next slides are showing some of the things that people are doing and some of the ways you can prepare a landscape to be more fire resilient. This one here is a neighbor up on the hill where she had some very tall eucalyptus, and she's had them cut down. Not all the way down, but she's cut them down considerably, and she's working on getting the logs away and that sort of thing. But she's taken a big step to, get that fire hazard down. The next slide is it's very important in terms of biodiversity, fuel management, to tend the land at the right time for the birds and the oaks and the native wildflowers, and minimizing chances of starting a fire. So the things to keep in mind are bird nesting season and tending season are February through September. These little birds here I was doing tending, at the wrong time. I was trying to be, I got to get on this. And then I all of a sudden came across these little birds about 3 feet up in the pine tree in a little cranny. So it's best to prune and thin brush vegetation October through January, again, because birds are nesting. Pull or cut annual grasses by June, and again, watch for ground nesting birds and other animals. Next. In terms of the health of the oaks, to prune the oaks in late summer or early fall, so that their pathogens aren't spread. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, it just came back on. So I'm on for the health of the oaks and birds. I don't know if you have that slide up.
Yes,
so it's best to only cut branches up to 3 inches in diameter. Oh, okay. Only cut branches up to 3 inches in diameter to create an uplift of 6 to 8 feet high from the ground. This is in relation to oak trees. So seeing the previous slides from previous presenters, sometimes it's necessary to bring that height higher up. But oak trees, it's not so necessary. So these next few slides are from the Santa Lucia Conservancy, Carol Rice, who prepared the document on the fuel management standards. So they show how you can first selectively thin plants and prune them, and that spacing may be achieved through thinning the number of plants and pruning the amount of material in each plant or tree. So again, it's not a bare ground approach, it's thinning and pruning. Next.
Okay.
So the Chaparral Fuel Management Standard continued. Standard is achieved through spacing of bushes, and it's also, again, standard achieved through plant pruning. So these are a few more examples of what it looks like. You can limb up the manzanita bushes or whatever kind of bush you might have if it's a highly flammable kind of bush. Another slide from the Santa Lucia Conservancy shows how thick in one area the vegetation was, and then when they thinned it and pruned it, and the difference that it looks like. So you're opening up and providing air between the plants. Next one says oak and shrub woodland fuel management standard.
Yep.
And this one talks about removing ladder fuels, as has been talked about in previous presenters. And this is more common in the new fuel management plans. And it's also common where oaks are young. So you want to open up those areas where, personally, I have a lot of oaks, a lot of little baby oaks. So I've been working a lot on thinning those oaks. One more example of shrub spacing. It reduces the fuel volume and fire intensity, and at the same time, it maintains shrub cover. And the maximum patch size and space between the patches are linked to the shrub height. So let's say you have a shrub that's 1 foot high, then you need to have 2 feet space in between. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, you're great.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I keep on getting this thing saying my connection was lost.
Yeah.
So this for me is a work in progress, but this is my driveway. Okay, so I'm working on this to keep the native vegetation low. And with pruning, I'm pruning it a couple of times a year, maybe a little bit more. But keeping it low and still allowing this native vegetation to still, be there instead of having it be a bare landscape. And as Jamie had mentioned, the hydrated native plants around the home require less water than non-native. So hydrated native plants are just fine to have in your garden. And then here's an example of poison oak that was trimmed down to probably about 8 inches. And the remaining green plants that you see in the second image are snowberry and a little bit of poison oak, but basically everything was cut down low so that you don't have a lot of height of vegetation. And the benefit of tending vegetation this way is it reduces the annual grasses and invasive plants coming in. And then this is just on the other side of that hill, where the neighbor has been tending her land to support the natives, keep them low, keep them separated out. So in my opinion, it seems like this is a good image for thinking like a low intensity fire, keeping the plants low. And the next image is letting you all know that Carmel Valley Association has a few weed branches that you can borrow to get rid of Genita on your property. Just contact Carmel Valley Association. And then this is my last slide. A few things that I have found to be useful in learning more about firescaping and fire resilient landscapes are the Santa Lucia Conservancy Fuels Management Handbook, Greg Rubin, Native Plant Firescape Garden Designer, Pacific Horticultural Society After the Fire article, California Native Plant Society, and Fire Safe Marin. Well, thank you very much, and I hope that wasn't too disjointed.
Well, I sincerely apologize for the technical difficulties we had there, but that was a wonderful presentation, Paula, and thank you for sticking with it, even though it was a little difficult. Okay, so now I would like to, for the last...
Well, I just hope...
For the last 10 minutes we have here, I'd like to invite all of our panelists to turn their cameras on and their microphones on, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jamie, who's going to read out the questions for the panelists to answer. And then just for everyone else, I'm going to be, all of the attendees, I'm going to type in a couple links into the chat for you guys. Okay.
Okay. All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So I've got a few questions. I'll try to get one for each of the panelists. So Matt, one for you is from Kathleen Craig, is how do we request a CAL FIRE inspection to discuss how well we have created defensible space?
Oh, that's a good question. You can reach me directly through the CAL FIRE office in Monterey. I would be able to get you a hold of some of our defensible space inspectors, and they can come out, and if you'd like an inspection, they can do that. Usually if we do come out to an area to do inspections, we're going to inspect the entire neighborhood. One thing that you landed on, Jamie, and I wanted to thank you so much for all the things you said, because a lot of things that I cut out for time reasons, you nailed. But yeah, we're not just trying to create one house of safety here and there and otherwhere. We're trying to create entire communities of safety. So just like you said, getting together with your neighbors and working together, that's definitely the goal. And that's exactly why we come out and we'll do inspections in the entire area. If someone just wants basically a general idea of if they're doing a good enough job, again, readyforwildfire.org has some great pictures and descriptions of how to do it, but you can always contact me through either the CAL FIRE office in Monterey. They'll have my number and they can give it out to you, or I can share it with some of you here a little bit later on. But yeah, we'd be glad to come out, especially if it's an area of high fire danger and people have questions. We're always glad to come out and talk to you about that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt. Paula, I've got one that I think you could answer possibly. So there's a question from Karen Ferlito.
Okay.
And she says, on a 40 by 100 lot in Carmel, how do you achieve defensible space and have anything but rocks and dirt? So were you able to hear me, Paula?
Well, from what I've understood, I mean, I live in a, can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yeah.
Can you hear
we
me?
can hear you. Yes.
Can you hear? Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, what I've understood is that you can have low growing plants, plants that are hydrated, plants that don't create a fire ladder into a neighboring tree, and plants that have space around them. As you had shown, Jamie, you can have that beautiful Cleveland VI sage, but give it space around it with some rocks, rock mulch. So there's a great article actually by a woman landscaper down in Southern California through the California Native Plant Society. I think it's their latest magazine, who talks all about how to have a garden while still meeting the firescaping needs. And so again, you can have a landscape. It needs to be hydrated, but if you use natives, you don't have to use a ton of water, because most natives don't like too much water in the summer. So you give them enough to keep them hydrated, but not too much. And you have them spaced with the hard rock spacing, hard rock or cement or whatever, little islands. So I don't know if that answers the question well enough.
Sure. No, thank you, Paula. No, I'm sure
You should be happy to call me. I'd be happy to talk with you, Karen.
Right. Thank you, Paula. Matt, I've got maybe another one, and it ties in to what Paula was saying about eucalyptus. Kathleen Craig asked, if a neighbor has a cluster of dead and dying eucalyptus within 5 feet of a public driveway, can an official encourage them to remove the trees?
We can always encourage them. 5 feet of the public driveway, it always depends on whose property the trees are actually on. With the Public Resource Code 4291, the way that works, it also has to do with the distance of those trees from structures. So that would be a case I'd have to look at. But obviously, eucalyptus trees, especially dead or dying near any access road, are a concern. Any dead or dying trees, I often list the 4 Ds, and maybe you'll agree with me, maybe not. But if it's dead, diseased, dry, or dying, I say get it out of there. That's just how I feel about it, especially when it comes to eucalyptus.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, Chris, if you don't mind, I've got a question that perhaps you could address. This is from Barbara Williams, and she asked, does Garland Park have a vegetation management plan?
You know, that is a very good question, and I'm not sure that I know whether that, what the answer to that is. I know that there have been some residents lately, and in fact, it was what motivated an hour-long discussion this afternoon at our CVA meeting, and that is that apparently there are a number of eucalyptus trees under which years of accumulated, falling bark and so forth. And there's a real concern about what a fire hazard they are, particularly since recently discovered in there was a thrown away cigarette, which is, I think I mentioned earlier about our concerns about tourists perhaps not knowing. And so I don't know, Paula, you may know a little bit more about that than I do, but if this is a concern, I'm just not sure how much is actually going on at the park, but it's certainly something that I will look into and try to find out the answer for that. I do know that as far as I can recall, I do not think there are any fire prevention or like no smoke signs, no smoking signs and so forth at the entrance, which seems to me, some advisories about that would be warranted. Yeah, so Paula, if you could add to that, that would be great. Can she hear me? Yep.
I think there's just...
Well, I think I don't know a whole lot. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
A delay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. I think actually I know maybe just about as much as you do right now in terms of Garland Park and any fire management plan. I understood from you, Jamie, that the Park District is interested in, conversations with regards to the grant that you're working on, but I don't know to the degree that they have an actual management plan for fire resilient landscape, within the park. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I've not had a chance to talk with the general manager.
I was going to say that we'll pursue that since it is an issue that has just recently come up with us in the last week.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paula. I'm going to do one more question, and I'm just going to throw it out there. It might be maybe geared a little bit towards Matt, but so this is a question from Allison Mitchell, and this says, cutting back potential fields of the property line and beyond, if possible, what if the adjacent property is owned by the Forest Service? So this must be someone who lives deep in Big Sur.
That's a really good question. Often we do come across properties where the adjacent property isn't someone you can just go talk to or approach easily and say, hey, let's be neighborly, which going back to my first question or second question about the eucalyptus trees along the driveway and reiterating something Jamie said, working with your neighbor is going to be essential for this. try to create some line of communication. In this case, maybe not possible. You can contact the U.S. Forest Service. They have some offices. What I would recommend is contact them, give them your exact address, and let them know that you have what type of vegetation, how close to your home. See if they can work with you. We cannot work on someone else's property without written consent, but what I would suggest is manage yours as best you can. Create as much buffer zone, especially on that side if you have concerns, and do all you can within your property, meanwhile contacting the U.S. Forest Service and giving them your exact location and what types of vegetation you're concerned about.
Great. Thank you, Matt. So just a time check, we're at 6:45. There are more questions, and we are going to attempt to answer all of them as we can and get them back to the people who asked them. But I wanted to ask the panelists if they, I wanted to say thank you, first of all, for presenting all this great information. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And there are some questions that I'll answer offline, but I'd like to say thanks once again.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.